My name's Cora, and this is HIV Real Talk. Today we're going to be covering the ins and outs of HIV. Everything from treatment, prevention, transmission, and we'll even debunk a few myths. This is important information to know if you're someone living with HIV, if you know someone living with HIV, or even if you just want to learn a little bit more. And I promise you, this isn't a long sciencey video with a bunch of big words. This is just real talk. We'll start with a little get to know you for HIV. This is HIV. Not actually, but it's a good representation and it's kind of cute. HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus. Basically, this little guy likes to travel from host to host. When HIV finds a host, it really makes itself at home. We'll see what this looks like in humans when HIV enters the bloodstream and binds with white blood cells. But first, a quick fact about white blood cells from an expert.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Robison. I'm a professor of immunology and microbiology at Manchester University. White blood cells are really important to our immune system because they can consume and present antigens to other parts of the immune system. Without our white blood cells, we don't have a very good immune response.
When HIV latches onto these white blood cells, kind of weakens their ability to do that. Okay, so our HIV friend has found its way into the human bloodstream and it's found a host. Now it's ready to reproduce. HIV normally looks like single-stranded RNA. But when it's ready to reproduce, it can transform into double-stranded DNA. It's kind of like a transformer or something. Once it transforms into the viral DNA, it finds its way into the nucleus or the brain of the cell. There it uses something called integrase to replicate simultaneously with human DNA.
HIV has a lot of different enzymes that help us function. One such enzyme is integrase. In integrase, HIV actually takes its own genetic information and then covalently links it to your genetic information, thus resulting in the production of viral DNA and white blood cell DNA.
Now our HIV has tricked its host into creating HIV virons. Essentially, this is making HIV protein at the same time as it makes human DNA. This is what the virons look like. Then the process starts all over again. Don't worry, we won't watch the whole thing again. We'll just do a quick recap. Remember, HIV finds a home. This looks like a human in the bloodstream. Makes itself at home. Does this by binding with a white blood cell. It then transforms itself to look like double-stranded DNA, and then it replicates and does the process over again. That's what infection looks like. Now let's talk about transmission. There are many different factors that influence the risk of transmitting HIV. They include, but are not limited to, the number of sexual partners one has, access to immediate medical care, education about healthcare, and socioeconomic status. Myth: HIV can be passed through high fives, hugging, or kissing. The fact is, HIV can only be transmitted through semen or other sexual fluids, blood, breastfeeding, pregnancy, or labor. So unless you're in contact with one of those fluids from an HIV-infected individual, you cannot transmit or pick up HIV. HIV can be passed from mothers to children through breastfeeding, pregnancy, and labor. But if you're in labor, continue that and come back to this video later. We'll talk about how people can decrease their risk of passing mother-to-child transmission through highly active antiretroviral therapy. We'll talk about that next when we discuss prophylaxis, prevention, and treatment for HIV. Myth: HIV can only be spread through male-to-male sexual intercourse. Not true. The fact, although HIV disproportionately affects gay and bisexual men, HIV can be passed through many forms of sexual contact and is not exclusive to one sexuality. In the way of prevention, this isn't really cutting it anymore. There are a few preventable ways that HIV can be spread, such as unprotected sex and exposure to unsterile needles. These are just a couple of ways that HIV can be spread, and there's more as talked about before, but these ones are preventable. Unprotected or unsafe sex can be prevented mostly through condoms, or the decrease of sexual partners, and transparency with future sexual partners. Blood transmission can be prevented through the use of sterile and safe needles. This includes tattoos, piercings, and even medical injections. There is also a high prevalence of HIV blood transmission through drug use and drug injections. Sterile needles are important in this instance too. Wait, there's one more. In addition to these methods of prevention, there's also HIV testing available. These can be found at a drugstore and taken home to be tested, or you can find testing at your local physician's office. In addition to prevention, there's also prophylaxis. Prophylaxis is kind of like prevention, but in this instance, it includes medication. For HIV, there's two types of prophylaxis. They include PrEP and PEP. PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis. This is for people who might have an increased risk for developing HIV. PEP is post-exposure prophylaxis. PEP is only to be taken in emergency situations and can only be taken up to 72 hours after exposure. Both of these are given in the form of medication. The next part is going to be...
Wait, I have a question.
Oh, yeah. What's up?
If I get HIV, is my life over?
That's a great question, but the answer is actually no. There are treatment methods to provide long and fulfilling lives for people with HIV and AIDS. Those might include highly active antiretroviral therapy and will always include some combination of HIV medications. Treatment will require diligent care, meetings with a medical provider, and likely a scheduled regimen for taking medications. But this may be a small price to pay for a full life. If you have been diagnosed with HIV or AIDS, there is hope for a full life. Treatment is an option. Yay! You made it to the end of the video. Good job to you. You took a step to improve your life or the life of someone else around you. And now you can give a little science lesson too. I want to leave you with a couple things to remember when talking about HIV. HIV is not limited to a specific group of people. HIV can only be transmitted through a very few specific routes. Having HIV does not mean your life is over, and HIV is preventable and treatable. Remember that this video will be here for you to download or refer back to if you have other questions. And if there's things that we didn't talk about in this video, there will be links below for you to refer to if you have other questions about HIV and AIDS. Remember that together we can educate and break the stigma about HIV. Thanks for watching HIV Real Talk.